Welcome to the newest Fantasy Femme Fatales deep dive series. If you're a Helldiver or a Howler, you've come to the right place because we're about to deep dive into Mars, the Institute, and the beginnings of rebellion for the ages. That's right, we're diving into the world of Red Rising. Today's episode is going to cover just over half of the book, so chapters 1 to 29. And then we'll be back for part 2 to jump back in at chapter 30 through to the end. Just a little trigger warning, just like this book, these episodes are going to contain violent content, so the triggers of the book are going to apply to these episodes as well. Before we get into things, as always, we will start off with a spoiler-free section to talk through our initial thoughts, feelings, and reactions. This one's going to be pretty tight because the purpose of the episode is to get into Red Rising, but we want to give you a bit of a taste of our experience so far. So if you haven't read the book yet, we'll make sure to give you a spoiler warning right before we get into the good stuff. I'm really excited about this series because I have a very special co-host. That's my hubby, Jason. We've shared so many amazing reads over the years. And the more I learned about this series, the more it sounded just like something we'd enjoy reading together. So I'm very excited to have him on the podcast and dig into this series with me. So, Jason, why don't you say hello to our lovely listeners?
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Sarah. I appreciate the invite, and I'm excited to be on the podcast with you today.
Amazing. Happy to have you. So, what do you think? Should we get into it? We've got a lot to cover today.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so let's talk spoiler free first. I want to get a feel. Who do you think would like Red Rising?
I think, anybody that likes your kind of major fantasy stories, it's hard to think of somebody that really wouldn't like. I kind of feel like this book has a lot of the greatest hits from books like Game of Thrones, Dune, Hunger Games. But at the same time, it stands on its own. It seems fresh, but kind of familiar all at the same time. So yeah, I can't think of too many people that wouldn't like it unless you're looking for something that's a bit more of a slow burn or super complex world building. How about you?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Like, I do think it appeals to quite a large audience. I think if you're going in thinking it's going to be an epic romance, as of yet, it's not that. But I think of like people who grew up reading The Hunger Games and Harry Potter, like you said, like this feels like the adult series for those people who really got swept away into those worlds. And when things got a little dark, this definitely feels like a series that would appeal to those people that want a series that's going to go there, so to speak.
I agree. Yeah, this one drew me in right away. One thing I was a little surprised with, or pleasantly surprised with, having just read some of the classic, like the Dark Tower series, Lord of the Rings. There's definitely components of them that's a bit of a slow build, and sometimes got to get 100 pages or so into it before it really grabs you. It hits page turner mode. So yeah, I was really impressed with this book in terms of how quickly the story got its hooks into you and got you just like totally engaged while still doing a lot of world building and introducing a lot of characters at the same time.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those books that when I've seen it online, I've seen people talk about it. I imagined that the first book would be bigger. And for the people who are watching, I have our book here. She's not that big. It's like 400 or so pages. So going into it thinking, oh, this is going to be kind of a light introduction to this series, like it's definitely not that. He packed so much story into this book. I found that really refreshing and really surprising. Like sometimes you really have to work for it in a first book of a 6, 7 book series. And I'll say his writing style took me a minute to get used to. It's just very different than anything that I've read before, but I really grew to appreciate it because he kind of forces you to slow down because he's saying so much in so few words. And so, like the world building that you referred to, it's all there, but what might be done on one page, another author might have taken 15 pages to cover. So, it does have a way of feeling very action oriented and things evolve very, very quickly.
Yes, I agree. Yeah.
How did the book compare to what you were expecting before you started it?
Yeah, well, the cool thing about this book is for me, I didn't really know anything about it other than a lot of people had told me it was really good. The name Red Rising to me suggested some sort of revolutionary component, and I suspected something to do with Mars and maybe some sort of hero's journey, and kind of turned out to be all of those things to a certain extent. But I think what I was surprised at is the scope of the story and the world. It was obviously, we know now it's not fully contained to Mars. It's much broader than that. And actually, one of my favorite parts of the way this story is told is how it goes really micro to expanding and unfolding the world. I know we'll get into more of those details, but yeah, it was kind of cool just going into this without any real expectations and having fresh canvas to explore here.
Yeah. I definitely had some expectations myself. I thought it was going to be the opposite of what you just described. I thought the scope was going to feel really big. I feel like a lot of the fantasy and sci-fi books that we've read, that's been the experience is you get kind of thrust in. The only one I can kind of think of is like the Dark Tower series starts fairly small, but that's often the case in my experience reading fantasy. You're typically kind of thrown in, and while you do have that here, the scope is very small, but it's like a rapidly expanding experience as you read it. So I think that I expected to have to work a lot harder to build a world in my head than I ended up having to in this story. You never really know how you're going to emotionally connect. And I emotionally connected with characters on page 5 or something. Like it was so early that some of the characters, the things that they were saying were so impactful to me. That really changed the game in my experience because you don't always get that, but what a difference it makes when you do. All of a sudden, you just want to sit down with that book whenever you can.
Yeah, I was really impressed with that too, how quickly we became kind of emotionally invested in the characters and the relationships, and how, even though it is sort of a complex world and society that's going on, it didn't feel like that difficult to process it and get it.
And on that note, as part of the deep dive process, I basically read the book twice, not word for word, but that's just part of the recapping experience. And it was really interesting. I finished the book. I won't be spoiling anything, but I went back to the beginning as I was recapping all the details, and I was getting all those little tidbits that don't make a ton of sense when you're just starting, and they were all sinking in so much more. So I think this is going to be a really helpful episode for people, especially if you're preparing to read the next book. So you're just wanting to make sure you really got what you were meant to get. I think we're going to do a good job here of getting into those details for you. But before we get into the deep dive, you started reading Red Rising on audiobook first, and then you switched. I think you kind of flip back and forth, or you have been. So I'm curious where you're at right now. What's your recommendation around Red Rising physical versus audiobook experience?
Well, they're both really good. The audiobook is a well produced audiobook. The voice actors are really good in it. And I like the convenience of the audiobook. But for me, I always prefer the physical reading experience. My brain just digests the information better, and I feel like I'm absorbing more of the story. I find when there's a lot of characters and a sort of a world that is being created, it's just easier to get distracted, and sometimes you miss some key points. So I definitely prefer the physical book experience for this type of book.
Yeah, honestly, I'm always like amazed because I just can't really get into a new series on audio, not like fantasy or sci-fi like this one. I struggle, like my brain just doesn't keep track of things in the same way as when I have a physical book. Maybe later in the series when the world is built in my brain I could. But there are a lot of people who listen to these types of books all the time on audio. And I know that this series in particular, I've heard good things about the graphic audio version. I know there's another version. So it's always interesting. It's like your experience is your experience and you know how your brain works, but I'm with you. And I mean, I think that not to keep like bringing this book up, but reading the special edition version, there's just something to the weight of the pages and the feel of them and the little details. Like it created this kind of luxurious experience where I really felt like I was like a member of the institute. It made me want to sit down with it. So I may have felt the same way on with just like your average version, but I like those details when it comes to the reading experience. I think they're kind of cool how they shift your perception of things.
And to add a third option into the mix, what I've also been doing, and I know you enjoy doing that sometime, is listening to the audiobook while reading the book creates a really nice immersive experience where you're absorbing the content through more of your senses, and it feels like a fun way to do it when you can really sit down and dedicate to getting into the story that way.
Yeah, imagine we could go back in time and do Dune immersive for the first time. I feel like that would have changed the game. We really struggled with like so many of the words and like we still love that series, but knowing what I know now, I would have jumped right in with an immersive read of Dune.
And that's such a perfect example. Like, I still can't believe I read the first three Dune books or I listened to them on audiobook, and then we went
Yeah.
back and did a reread, and I was like, holy cow, I missed a lot of nuances while I was listening, because they're like 30 or 40 hours long. And yeah, if you're not totally dialed in when you're listening to the audiobook, you can miss some things. And Dune is a type of book that you're going to get a lot more out of it on the reread anyways, but especially comparing the audio to the physical copies.
Okay, kids. Well, we're going to jump into the deep dive now so you can consider this your spoiler warning. And if you've read chapters 1 through 29, buckle up. Here we go. So, our book starts with a litany. What a creative way to start the story. 14 verses that we will come to know as Eo's song. And then it's followed by like a letter of sorts, an excerpt. I think at this point we can kind of assume that it's from Darrow's point of view. But at the time, you don't really know who it is or what their position is, but it still packs a punch. The book basically starts with the quote, I would have lived in peace, but my enemies brought me war. And boy, is that a tone setter. So, a little poetic, mournful, but then this like vow of brutality as you compare the litany with that first quote. So I'm curious if you had a similar feel, Jason. What was your reaction to the start of the book?
Yeah, pretty much set the tone for it, kind of give you a hint of where things are going. This sort of average person that was willing to be going about their day to day life through oppression and all sorts of circumstances is going to be forced into that hero role, or maybe not hero, evolve into some sort of warrior capacity was the feel I got from it.
Yeah, like a real juxtaposition from this song that, a lot of these songs that appear in like Lord of the Rings and those sorts of stories, they often do have a bit of like a sadness woven in with this message of sorts. And you don't know what the message is, but it's got a balance of beauty and sadness. And then you get that line where like, oh, okay, shit's going to get real pretty fast, I think.
And I just like the way they're able to simplify, basically if you were to take the whole book and boil it down into those two phrases, you can get the
Mhm.
theme of the book just from that, and
Yeah,
then watch it unfold from there.
Yeah, Darrow didn't want this, but here he is. Okay, from there we go into part one. Our book really begins with our introduction to Darrow and Io. Io is Darrow's wife and his childhood love. And we very quickly get a sense of this dystopian world they're living in, that there's this class of laborers versus others. And these laborers are vying for survival. They don't even have food. And they're on this planet, Mars, where they're mining helium-3, which is the lifeblood of the terraforming process. Darrow is part of this Helldiver crew who's responsible for mining the helium-3. And at the beginning of our story, they've done the unthinkable. They've mined the most helium-3, making them worthy of the laurel. More food than they could dream of. At the laurel ceremony, Io seems off, and it's revealed that Gamma gets the laurel, even though they didn't earn it, and the system is rigged. So this is our first cue that something is amiss in the land of Mars, and this was our first kind of crumb. So we got a little bit of conflict, I would say, between these characters, both between the groups of Helldivers, but also just the characters themselves. So how did this start to piece together a feel for the story, Jason?
Yeah, well, I think the story starts in the depths of the mines. So right off the bat, you're basically as far down in this world as we can get to start, which is cool as we see the way we get the more macro perspective quickly as the story unfolds. We also learn about helium-3, which is used for terraforming of the planets. We still don't really know even now how that helium-3 is used, but it give you that spice-like quality from the Dune story as like the key element that society revolves around. And then just from a conflict standpoint, you quickly kind of get this vibe of young versus old. Darrow is the new generation, wants to be a little bit more bold and risky to win that laurel. Tired of not getting the bounty that the laurel provides. And it seems like there's this contrast between his age group and his approach versus his uncle and some of the older generation being a little more cautious and safe. And maybe they've seen the consequences of the risk taking. Seems to be this conflict between those two groups.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's this element, I mean, from Darrow's point of view, he's just seeing them as accepting this form of punishment. They don't have enough food to eat. He thinks that his wife is off doing favors of some sort just to bring food back home when he feels like that's his responsibility. But really, we quickly come to learn that people like Uncle Nero may not seem like they really know a lot, but they've been through some stuff. And there's a reason why they're trying to keep Darrow at bay, because there are real consequences for pushing back against the systems and the regime that they're living under. I think that's a perfect segue into our next section. It becomes evident really quickly, and particularly so in the next section of the book, just how deep Darrow's love and admiration for Io goes. He thinks to himself, without me, she would not eat. Without her, I would not live. She is the spirit of our people. So Io pulls Darrow away from the crowd. This is at the laurel ceremony. And she's told him that she has a gift. She takes him through the tunnels, and he gifts her a haimanthus flower, what is referred to as the blood blossom on Mars. She then takes him through the tunnels and up a grate, and it opens into this hidden forest and a sky filled with stars, animals, and butterflies, a place that's been kept hidden away from the reds and kept only for the grays and those above them, like the golds. She's brought him here to show him something, and she's also brought him here to have a serious conversation. She pushes him to really think about the fact that they're slaves in this life that they live, and that there's a possibility for more, no matter what the cost, that it would be worth fighting for. She talks about the emptiness of life without freedom. She talks about how emptiness is living chained by fear, fear of loss, of death. She says, I say we break those chains, break the chains of fear, and you break the chains that bind us to the golds, to society. I live for the dream that my children will be born free, that they will be what they like, that they will own the land their fathers gave them. And Darrow tells her, I live for you, Io. And she tells him, then you must live for more. And this very sad moment sets off a chain of events that will really create the entire story. Shortly after this, we learn that Darrow's father was also a rebel. So I think he was someone who Io really looked up to, seeing him go through what he did, even though he basically sacrificed himself. He was hung, he did what they call the reaping dance, and he was hung for it. So in this scene with Darrow and Io, they leave the vents and they unfortunately walk into 3 of the tin pot guards. They are brought into a prison and then brought out for their floggings, their punishment. Darrow and Io are brought out separately. And when Darrow sees her, there's something in her eye that tells him that something isn't right. Darrow takes his 48 lashes and then they bring Io up for hers. But after her 13th lashing, Io looks to Darrow and then begins to sing the song. And he knows it as soon as he starts to hear it as the song of death and the song that is forbidden. And he knows that they will kill her for singing this song. They offer Io her last words, and she calls up to her sister. Darrow can't hear what she says to Dio, but Dio lets out this moan that Darrow says will haunt him forever. The floor drops, and unfortunately, Io dies. Darrow then can't sleep, knowing that Io is left hanging in the commons. They're not allowed to take the dead down after they've been hung. How barbaric. But if he were to take her down, he would be sentencing himself to death. So he sneaks out and he stumbles into his uncle Nero. Nero, the drunk, offers him a drink. He's trying to talk Darrow out of what he's about to do, but he kind of gives up and sends him off with a cryptic message telling him to say hi to his parents and someone named Dancer. So Darrow goes on to take Io down from the commons and buries her under the stars. He wakes up in the morning, and him and his family all know that he will be hung too. But in the commons, they offer him his last words. So he calls Dio back up to the stand and asks what were Io's last words. And she looks back at her mother Her mother shakes her head, and he knows that something's being kept from him. Then the platform drops, and his brother Kieran stumbles forward to pull his feet, as they have to do when they're being hung, and Uncle Nero shoves him off. He winks, he touches Darrow's feet, and he pulls, and that is the end of our scene. So this was pretty huge. This was like for a first act in a book, the main character's dead. It was pretty epic. How did you feel at this point in the story?
The first thing that I just wanted to say is how completely chilling it is to me, the way he's written this hanging and the lack of gravity, and how a loved one has to pull on the feet to finish the job. I thought that was a really great writing, also heartbreaking at the same time, but a pretty interesting way of bringing you in emotionally. Backing up a little bit, as I was mentioning, going from micro to macro, we've already went from the depths of the mines up to the surface where the caves are, and now discovered that there's this terraformed world on the surface of Mars. So we're quickly rising, as the book would suggest. The part when they first got to the outer world on the surface, it reminded me a little bit of the Matrix. When Neo first realizes the Matrix, it's almost like Darrow's world that he thought he knew is completely thrown for a loop, to say the least. And it's almost like Neo is asking him to make the choice between the red pill or the blue pill, kind of like going on just, believing what you've been believing and not changing the course of things, or seeing what's going on and actually doing something about it. So I thought that was an interesting element of it. As far as like the Darrow and EO component, like when we talked about how quickly Pierce was able to build these emotional connections and really create this love story that had a believability to it, and I was bought into it. Like within that short amount of time, you could like really sense the love, the respect, the bond that those two had, which just ratcheted up the emotion that much more when it ended in disaster.
Yeah, and I mean, they're 16. Like, they're so young too. When I read that part of how young they were, I thought two things. I thought, first, it made me think of Romeo and Juliet. And then I immediately got this gut wrenching feeling like, I feel like something's going to happen to Io. And I like her so much already. She has heart. She's got this desire for justice, for freedom, for a life that's like bigger than the life that they're living. But you get this like foreboding kind of feeling that characters like that, who are putting it all out there so fast, don't often do so well. But I also thought you could interpret their age as something that would put you off, or you could interpret it as, in a world like this, it's kind of indicative of that, of the element of survival. And they fell in love young and they get married, and this is just the way of life. And I agree with you. I really felt for both of the characters, the way that he uses words. There's like a poetic quality to how he talks about certain thoughts and feelings. And that introduction with like the litany, I felt that there as well. The intention of writing something that's beautiful but mysterious. But this whole scene of her bringing him up to this beautiful place, only to basically decide in that moment that when he wasn't really where she was at mentally, that she was going to make a choice that wasn't going to work out for the both of them. And she was willing to do that. And she was going to be the one to show him that she couldn't be his whole world. She wasn't going to let that happen.
Do you think she knew this is how it would unfold from the time she took him up there? Do you think she suspected they may get caught and this was like her final sort of moment with him to share this with him? Or do you think it might have been just bad luck that they got caught coming back, and maybe she thought she'd be more part of the long-term plan of creating this revolution?
I think that it's not like that's how she thought it was going to go, but it's almost like she did nothing to the contrary to protect them. Both of them knew they were going to a place that they weren't supposed to be. That is not for them. She happens to like work around these tunnels, so she found it out. But even when Darrow buries her, there is a scene where it's like the women who are working the webs kind of look at him, and he kind of knows that they're going to look out for him and they're not going to say something, or they're not going to try to stop him. They're not going to call in the guards. And there's none of that when Io takes him into that place. I think she had a plan should he have the conversation she wanted him to have. And then he didn't. He wasn't really willing to explore the idea of a rebellion. And that's kind of what she was asking for. So it's like she gave up. That was how I interpreted it. And there's some breadcrumbs here. We don't actually know, but when she's hung and she calls up Dio, and there's that scene and she lets out this cry. And then when Darrow goes up and he asks Dio and Dio won't tell him, all of this read to me alongside the fact that Io makes a comment in that conversation with Darrow about what she wants for her children. It all led me to believe that Io dies and she is carrying Darrow's child, and she's unwilling to live a life that doesn't look different and bring children into the world. And we don't know that. That's to be determined, but it makes me think there was an intentional element of how it went.
Yeah, and I guess we learn right away that really no character is safe in this story because I think, obviously in the first part of the book, you're kind of thinking Io is going to be sort of a major character throughout this story.
Yeah, you hope she is. You know that
Yeah.
among all this other stuff that she seems wise and she seems to really get it. I know we've made a couple comparisons to Dune, and they're not to discredit Red Rising at all. Some books evoke a feeling of a story you've read before, and she definitely gave off Chani vibe where she's like willing to say the things that need to be said, but her love is pure. She wants the best for Darrow. And also the fact that they walk into this like terrarium type of a place. Like it really reminded me of the scene in Dune where Paul finds this similar kind of like hidden gem of a world that's being built that is not a desert planet. So definitely some parallels there. How did you take the meaning of this section being called slave?
I took it pretty literally. Like, I think it just establishes when they had the laurel taken away from them that the deck is stacked in a way that they can't do anything about it. And the oppressors are controlling the game. And no matter, how good of a hell diver Darrow is or how well his house performs, there's always going to be a ceiling on what they can achieve in life. And while they're not, slaves chained and bound physically, they're slaves in the sense of their lot in life is pretty much established and they're dependent on the society to provide for them and to give them what they need to survive.
Yeah, I also thought about the fact that in this world, you don't know you're a slave until you know you're a slave. Where when we think of a slave, we think of it as a much more obvious form of oppression. And the way that Pierce Brown wrote this book, it just feels like there are so many metaphors or underlying references to things that harken back to our world. There is a bit of a nod to waking up to the chains that hold you down. And this is Darrow's story of him realizing that he's a slave, and what is he going to do about it? Is he just going to like sit back, or is he going to push back and rebel?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's kind of what Io was trying to get him to think differently about. It's not just that you're technically a slave physically, you're a slave mentally in terms of how limited your thinking is and your limited expectations of what can be accomplished.
They fooled you into thinking that you have power because you're a hell diver. All of these ways that they fooled you into thinking that life is great, even though you could have more. Part two is called Reborn. And surprise, surprise, Darrow wakes up. He has been buried alive and he digs himself out of the dirt and realizes that Uncle Nero may not have pulled his feet as hard as he was supposed to. So two strangers quickly show up and they take him to a man they call Dancer. Dancer is quite a character. He tells us first that Nero is an informer. So he is part of a rebellion that is being formed. We don't know really by who or what the ultimate mission is, but we know that Darrow is being pulled into this, whether he likes it or not. He explains that they call themselves the Sons of Ares. This is one of many references that Pierce Brown is going to make to Greek mythology, to history in all of its forms. He talks about how the Greens helped the rebel group hijack the broadcast of Io's death and that it's being played all over the planet and everyone is hearing her song and calling her Persephone. Dancer asks if Darrow wants to die again. And he answers that he really just wants to kill everyone who was responsible for Io's death. Dancer encourages him to widen his gaze, and they move up to the surface of a lift at the same time. And Darrow walks into a home, a place he's never been, with floors, carpets, music, and light, and then a wall of glass that lets in the sun. And he falls to his knees and looks upon a sprawling city. And Dancer tells him, "Now you understand. We are deceived." Beyond the window are parks, rivers, gardens, and men and women flying, shimmering in gold and silver. There are ships flying in the air. And it really sets in on Darrow in this moment that the terraforming is complete, and Eo's references to them being slaves has never hit harder than in this moment. Earth has already come to Mars, and the Reds were just left below as slaves. It was 700 years ago when Earth expanded to their moon, Luna. Luna became Earth's port, and from there, it colonized moons and planets of the solar system. Helium-3 is used to terraform the other worlds and moons, Mars offering the mining colonies that have helped to achieve all of this. And as Luna colonized the solar system, they were taxed and owned by corporations on Earth, and Luna rebelled, the Golds and their society, against the countries of Earth. Earth fought back and lost, and this was what's referred to as the Conquering. Luna became the power and the port of the solar system, and a system built on the backs of Reds. So finally, we really understand what is going on Mars and how deep all of this oppression really goes. What did you make of this unraveling of the history of Mars and the colonization and how all the planets fit together?
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting as we continued zooming out on this world. Definitely set the stage and the foundation for the scope of the story. Um, and you get a sense of the role that Darrow may play in it. How about you?
I think it also starts to build a bit of the chessboard of the game, where we have, like you said, had this really like microscopic scope of what's going on, but we start to slowly get a glimpse of all the power players and maybe the scope of the villains. Pierce Brown weaves in here and there elements of Earth and elements of history, and Earth is not depicted as a friendly planet. Earth is depicted as a planet that was being bought by corporations. There's real elements, there's ties back to our world and how in another reality things could escalate this way, right? So I found that to be quite interesting. We're starting to get a bigger scope of things and who we might come in contact with as the story evolves.
One other thing I wanted to mention, just going back when we thought Darrow might be done for, I don't know if many people would have really thought that. Even though we lost EO, I thought we're not going to lose Darrow as well. But I feel like the main giveaway was when Uncle Nero winked at him. I
Mm-hmm.
feel like that would just be a dick move if you were gonna actually pull him hard enough to kill him and then do the wink before. So there was something in that wink that gave me a little glimmer of hope for him.
Yeah. I mean, how dark is it that they like made Darrow pull on Eo's feet? It's hard to believe that someone would do that. Even in this world, that's how deep this indoctrination into the oppression goes, that they're willing to do this thing as if it's like an act of kindness before they say goodbye to their loved one.
Yeah, that part gets me. There's certain parts of this book where after I read it, I couldn't stop thinking about it. And like the having to pull the feet of the loved one to finish the job. Yeah, that one sticks with you.
Yeah, I remember thinking like, I'm pretty sure he's dead because she just died. And so he's just died. But maybe there's some sort of situation where he's going to come back. What I did pick up on was when Nero pops out of nowhere and gives them the flask and he like tries to get him to take a drink, and it was like one of those things that was kind of weird. Like I wonder if he gave him something. Again, this takes me back to like the Romeo and Juliet thing that I felt. The story of Romeo and Juliet is like the star-crossed lovers, and Romeo goes to the apothecary to get a drug to fake his death so they can get around this whole thing, and then Juliet thinks he's dead and kills herself. If you rewrote Romeo and Juliet, you're getting a very similar narrative. Io dies first, Darrow takes this drug, it manages to make him survive. So I thought some of those tie-ins were really interesting to pick up on.
I kind of thought something similar was happening. I thought his uncle was giving him a swig of something that was going to knock him out to just like stop him from doing something rash to sleep on it. But I guess it was to make him so he didn't struggle too much.
I think it was so that he looked dead. so that they could bury him. He could be buried alive and everyone would think he's dead. I think that also raises a good question. We have to assume at this point in the story that Nero's actually the only one who knows that Darrow's alive. So his family has all mourned him,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
also happens in Romeo and Juliet, is that everyone thinks Romeo's dead and then Romeo's not dead. Yeah.
yeah. That's what makes these books so great. Like you said, it's not anything against Red Rising. It's more, I love when the books pay homage to, in subtle ways, to these different stories, or you can make these connections, and yet it's
Mhm.
its own kind of unique, fresh story at the same time.
Yeah, even the reference to Persephone, the name Persephone comes up a few times, the name that is given to Io to people who don't know her. They talk about how her name was taken from the story of Hades and Persephone. So Hades is the god of death, and he took Persephone, he was promised her. He took her into the underworld, but she was the goddess of spring, and so she was destined to return back to Olympus and provide that to like the humans over and over again. So she's this symbol of oppression and this symbol of hope. And I thought that was a really cool connection that he made there, and hard to not feel for Persephone. What a story.
Yeah, I'm glad you explained that because I'm not quite as familiar with the Greek mythology as you. I know Ares is the god of war, but I didn't know the whole Persephone backstory.
Yeah, there's a lot woven in. Even the son of Ares, the way he talked that through, I thought was really interesting. There's like this reference between the Roman gods and the Greek gods, and how this rebel group, we don't really know what they are yet, the sons of Ares. We don't know who the leader is. I'm very curious who that might be. But this way of naming yourself after this horrible god who represents so much as almost like a beacon that like you can rise above it. As we move into the next part of the story, there have been references of different colors, the pinks and the grays and the obsidians. So we get a really good walkthrough from Dancer of the different groups and how they each have a purpose, and really each of them are responsible for something that helps to maintain the golds and their status. They then seek out the carver, Mr. Mickey, this crazy guy. Rather than just asking for what they want, they give him a gift. And it's a set of little golden wings and the request to make our man Darrow a gold. Plot twist. The reds are becoming golds. The plan is formed. Darrow will be made into a gold. He will be completely rebuilt. He's going to apply to the Institute, sell and reach the ranks of the peerless scarred, train to be a praetor, legate, a politico, and put himself in a prime position to do as Ares required. We learned that there are three types of graduates: the Institute, the peerless scarred, the graduates, and the shamed. So the peerless can ascend in society. They kind of have like free reign to become whatever they want to become based on the opportunities they're given. Simple graduates can become different things as well, but their prospects will be limited, and they still have to earn their scars, these scars that each of the peerless scars have on their face. And then there are the shamed. And the shamed are sent to distant hard colonies to oversee terraforming and are basically shunned. So you don't want to be ashamed. As things go deep and interesting with the carver, we see basically like a Wolverine style transformation of Darrow. He is surgically reborn into a machine of a man and a superhuman creature, a gold, but I would say like an elite gold. He's got some interesting skills that even the golds don't seem to have. And Darrow is nothing if not resilient. He was bitten by a pit viper at a young age, and Mickey talks to him about the poison running through his veins and how it strengthened his heart, and it's made him more resilient than most because most could not survive the carving that he's just gone through. We move from that into some very interesting training where they basically beat the crap out of him. They teach him how to fight. And there's a little bit of like a My Fair Lady style training exercise that goes on that's like a little less Audrey Hepburn and a little more Greek gladiator. But nonetheless, he's taught to speak differently and build an accent, and he becomes a brand new man. Darrow, O Andromedas, has been born. This was arguably one of my favorite sections of the book. I thought this was so cool. And for a character that you thought was maybe dead, but actually not dead, this is just nothing that I saw coming. How about you?
Yeah, I thought this was pretty crazy. I think your Wolverine or X-Men analogy is pretty apt in terms of the physical transformation. For some reason, all I kept thinking through this was about plastic surgeon. 100 years from now, this is what those procedures are going to be like.
It was a bit of like Minority Report with the alleyway surgeon that Tom Cruise hires to give him an eyeball replacement surgery, like that kind of a caliber of a surgeon we're talking about, but the most extreme bodily transformation that's ever been described in a book that I've ever read. So I thought things could have really gone bad here.
Yeah, it was that very interesting. Cool to see that transformation that Darrow went through.
Yeah, and I liked that in this montage sequence where we meet Dancer, we meet Mickey, and through this period of like recovery and transformation and training, we're learning a lot about the world. We're really getting a sense of who are these peerless Guard that we've heard spoken about before? How do the golds come to be? How does everything fit together in this world that Darrow really didn't even know existed? He only knew of the golds and that there were people of different colors, but he did not know they were flying around on ships and having the time of their lives. So I thought it was very well done. Like when you spoke earlier on about the world building, the way that Pierce Brown has built the world and made it feel so ingrained within a very action packed story. It was very interesting.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. I feel like, you had the actual physical transformation, but was almost more important is what you learned about the Gold Society, about the world, the different tiers within the Gold Society, and everything Darrow and we as the readers need to know before he goes into the Institute.
He and we are also learning what's at stake. The requirement for perfection, and you really get that in this montage when he's using the term bloody dam, and they're like, no, it's gory dam. You can't mess that up. They try to get him to change his first name, and he's like, no, I'm Darrow. And they're like, well, people are going to look at you weird because Darrow's not a highborn name. So they're building the stakes as we, are about to go into this next phase of the story where you've got all these people who live in the same class, and it's so easy to spot someone who's out of place. There's no room for error, and it's a great way to build that feeling of like excitement and anticipation and a bit of fear for our main character.
I like the way that they describe the difference between young pit vipers and old
Mhm.
ones. And even though there's not as venomous, the young ones are more dangerous because they just attack with such rage. And then comparing, you're going into basically a pit of young pit vipers.
Mhm.
And that kind of puts it in perspective. As polished as these golds look on the outside, the savagery and brutality within their society is something for us to be watching for.
Yeah, and maybe the idea that is Darrow the deadliest pit viper of them all because he's lived among them, and it's constantly spoken about in this book the fact that he has rage that is like permeating off of his body. We will get into that in the next section, but it's a metric that they use as they're testing him, and it's something that puts off some of the houses that your rage scores are like off the charts.
Yeah, that would be a little alarming if you were, conducting interviews for the modern day workplace and people are scoring
Yeah.
high on the rage score. You might want to be careful with that.
Yeah, you've got like a bone breaking handshake and you're off the charts on the rage score. We make our way into the Institute for the first time, and Darrow has his exam. We meet Cassius and Antonia. This scene is pretty casual, honestly. He goes in for a bit of a test. There's some questioning, but it's really our opportunity to get in the sandbox with some of these golds and for Darrow to have his first chance to socialize with them and see how he can pass. And he does a pretty decent job. Cassius is a pretty entertaining character and he lets Darrow be his off kilter self. But we get beginnings of this budding friendship. He is successful. He does very well on his exam, almost too well. And as he's leaving to head off to the Institute, Dancer gives him the knife ring and he gives him a Pegasus necklace that has Eo's flower inside. And these become his two pieces of home. On the shuttle to the Institute, we meet Julian, who at the time we don't know, but we later learn is Cassius's brother. And we learn Severo, this rugged little gold, if there ever was one, this little weirdo that is one of my favorite characters in this book. Darrow figures out pretty quickly that he's like leaps and bounds ahead of these guys in terms of their test scores. So he's sussing things out, figuring out where he might rank. He's finding it pretty interesting that these people aren't maybe as smart as he thought they would be. They arrive and the tone shifts real quick as the candidates are greeted by Nero, the arch governor. He goes into this whole big speech, and it's a real like tone setting speech. We get some really good, I think, metaphors and references in what is said. He first talks about how they're the chosen few, the peak of the human pyramid. He also talks about the fact that there are institutes all over the moons and planets. So there's candidates undergoing the same process in a bunch of other places, whether they're getting the same tests. We don't really know, but it does paint a bit of a picture that does feel very micro focused, that there's a whole solar system of candidates and young golds that are vying for these positions of power and how things might escalate. Darrow is caught up in this world of things he's never seen before and really coming to terms with the world he's living in and who he is now as this pretend gold. Nero talks about the history and the institute and that they're about to play a little game. He talks about how society has three stages: savagery, ascendance, and decadence. The great rise because of savagery, they rule in ascendance, but they fall because of their own decadence. Our savagery began when our capital Luna rebelled against the tyranny of Earth and freed herself from the shackles of democracy. Men are not created equal, they are averages, and there are outliers. You are the best of humanity, but you have been coddled. You've been treated like children, and were you born to a different color, you would have calluses, you would have scars, and you would know pain. So we get this glimmer into the fact that they're about to be put through it. That's really what the arch governor is trying to prepare them for, is that they are fragile little babies that need to go through some shit in order to really be prepared for the real world. Shortly after, Darrow is assessed by the house captains. This is like an examination of personality traits. This is like a rage metric we were just talking about. And this is where we first meet Fitchner, the proctor of House Mars. After the assessments, there is a draft, and Darrow is chosen. He's chosen 10th out of 1,000, so he does really well, and he's selected by Fitchner, House Mars, another iconic character in our story. How did you feel through this section, getting an introduction to Nero and Fitchner, two pretty iconic characters?
This is, to me, where the story really takes off. We've laid the foundation, we've set the stage, and for me, I've enjoyed this section of the book the most. You're starting to get a glimpse into some real golds. We've heard about what golds are like and how the society is, and now we're starting to see it firsthand. And it doesn't disappoint in terms of what we've been led to believe these golds are like.
Yeah, we have this idea of this man in power and how ruthless he'll be. Fitchner is this interesting, like, he kind of doesn't fit, and that makes him very likable because Darrow needs someone like that, right? And even though he's really in it to be like the best of the best, he would, I think, fail under many other of these houses because Fitchner just has something in him that is that gritty rage. He's had to fight for some things as well. So I thought it was interesting getting these different characters. And what I also found interesting about this scene in particular was if you really think about the way that Nero talks about society having three stages, I think you might find that we see a similar evolution that goes on in the story once these people are inside of the institute. I remember reading this part and thinking, like, I have no idea what's to come. I'm thinking it's like going to be a school. It's going to be something nice. They're golds, they're wealthy, and what they actually find was not what I thought they were going to find, but it really does fit with this vague speech that Nero gives them around how power is claimed and what they need to learn. They really are about to get some scars, I would say.
Yeah, things are about to get real.
It's about to get real, real. Yeah. And on that note, Darrow goes into his chambers for the first night, and he is taken in the middle of the night and then beaten to like a pulp. He's airlifted somewhere and then dropped in a cold room, and all of his clothes are taken from him. And he realizes that someone else is in the room, Julian. This is Cassius's brother. And this is where we learn that they are at the passage. Severo seemed to know a little something about the passage and when it might happen, but no one really knows what it is. And here they are. Fitchner enters the room and he tells them that unfortunately there's only one spot available, so only one of you is coming out alive. He drops a ring on the floor and basically says, fight to the death, and whoever makes it, makes it. Darrow doesn't hesitate, while Julian tries to talk logic and figure out a way to handle the situation. Darrow realizes that all it takes is for him to be in a stone room with two people who need the same thing for him to become a little bit more of the monsters that he's been trying to fight against. Darrow makes it look pretty easy, and it's pretty gross to read, actually. He like smashes his head into Julian's face a few times. He punches his sternum so hard he shatters it. And that's pretty much the end of Julian. And it hits Darrow. He does have a moment of guilt and sadness here as he looks down at Julian and thinks about the blood blossom that he gave Io. It's this very like poetic and dark moment where Darrow's realized that he's just taken a life.
When I talked about scenes I couldn't stop thinking about, this one's at the top of the list. Gut wrenching, heartbreaking, also pivotal moment, obviously, in the story. Darrow's had the physical transformation, but this is the first step of his mental and emotional transformation, I think, in terms of turning into the type of person that he needs to become to fulfill this mission.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Honestly, when the scene first started, I almost thought it was like a trick. Like there might be this other way of figuring out a way to not kill each other for them to both survive. And I almost thought it was like a test to see if they would kill each other. Kind of like how there was some trick with when he did the eating the card test
Mm-hmm.
with Dancer. But after that smash to the sternum, I realized it wasn't going to go that way. And
Yeah, poor Julian. Another one of those, like, oh, I guess we're going to go there moments. I always note those when I'm reading a book. Like, we lost Io, and now this, like, pretty innocent kid who was pretty likable on the bus, he starts a conversation with Darrow, and Darrow doesn't hesitate. Neither does Pierce Brown. That's what I would also say. In another book, I think this scene would have been a lot longer and there would have been more back and forth, but there isn't. Darrow knows what he has to do, even though he doesn't want to do it. And it's a tough scene to read.
yeah, it's a great point, and I kind of felt the same way too. I was almost like wanting to put the brakes on it myself as I'm reading. Like Darrow, let's not rush into this. Maybe there's another way. And so I guess that's the genius in the writing is you're almost in the same headspace as Julian, where there's got to be another way to do this. And I think the fact that they made Julian such a likable character and almost gave him this vulnerability of having to beat this person to death in cold blood
Mhm.
that you actually like and had a lot of positive qualities and seemed to be a fan of Darrow as well just made it that much more of a gut-wrenching scene.
Yeah. I remember even thinking that maybe they were the only ones who had to do this. Like maybe it's because even though Darrow's a gold, like it's known that his family is not very powerful. They're kind of like unknown, right? And so I thought, well, maybe they're just kind of the lowest on the rung here. And so they have to do it. But it did really like shift the tone after having this whole speech about like society is built and all these things, like these people are about to be like thrown into the wilderness. To have them forced to kill someone before they go to do that really sets the tone for like what's allowed in this place. And it's like they're forcing them to come to terms with like the level of brutality and savagery that they need to be prepared for. It's kill or be killed.
And there's something about the fact that they were both put in there naked that
Hmm.
adds to the savagery and the primal nature of it even more. Like it's one thing to stab somebody with a knife or kill somebody with a weapon, but to have to
Yeah.
physically kill somebody with your bare hands, like just adds that extra emotional sort of depth to the story when you're reading it.
Yeah, I can't remember who it is now. I want to say Titus because it would make sense, but they like share stories as things go on of like who killed who and how. And one of the stories is like so and so ripped the other guy's throat out, and I was like, Jesus, okay. Like it to your point, they don't have weapons, but there some of them are just like going for it.
When I first heard about the passage, I was not thinking that. I thought it was maybe some like obstacle course or something they would have to run to.
Spiritual awakening, maybe. I think something that is really interesting to pay attention to as the story evolves is how will Darrow or will he stay on this path of honoring and fighting for his people? And where will he deviate and become just like the people that he's been oppressed by? I think this is one of those moments where he has to toy with that every single time these things come up of, am I just like them now? He kind of is Like, it's not a nice thing to do.
Yeah, I agree. That's going to be the main one of the main storylines is he has to become one of them to accomplish what he's there to do. But is
Hmm.
he going to lose himself in the process and kind of lose perspective of where he came from? It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, is he our hero or our anti-hero? On that note, when they're talking about his mission, one of the things that Dancer says is that he's going to like move through this process and he's going to move into a position of power and then he will be there and able to do whatever it is that Ares or the sons of Ares want him to do, which to me just feels like another form of oppression. So I think that will be interesting to observe as well. And Darrow doesn't seem like the type of character in his current form that is really going to take a lot of advice or direction from people. He's kind of on his own mission, even though he's got his people in mind. But I think there is a potential for like another conflict that might emerge from this group that's made him who he is, but has their own agenda that he may or may not align with.
Agreed.
So we move into section 3, gold. And Darrow, for the first time, really questions if he can even do this. He's come out of the passage and he's realized, like, if this was the first challenge, then what is next? What's going to be asked of me? Darrow finds his way out of these tunnels and he is just praying that Cassius is dead so he doesn't have to face him. He just killed his brother. But Cassius appears and he starts asking around. He wants to get to the bottom of where exactly his brother is. And slowly he figures out that Julian didn't make it through and no one's going to tell him who killed him. Fitchner shows up right at the right time and gives them some words of wisdom because they're all pretty thrown off. Why would they go through this entire process just to kill each other before going into this next phase? And Fitchner basically says there's 600 people that are dead, and a lot of them who are dead were in the bottom 1%. So there was really no waste except for this one kid named Priam, who was really a very smart boy, but he was pampered. And that's what happens when you're pampered, is that you don't necessarily learn the things you need to know to become a leader or a conqueror. And then Fitchner tells them that this is your new family, so get cuddled up here. You're part of House Mars. There's 12 other houses, and this institute is built to make you smart, cruel, and wise. It's going to age you 50 years in 10 months, and if you win, you'll have your pick of apprenticeships and you'll be on the fast track to fame and power. After orientation, you'll be going to war with your fellow students to dominate the valley, a case study in gaining and ruling an empire, which is really exactly what happens.
The Priam character I
Mm-hmm.
found fascinating for a character that wasn't in the story very long. The other kids almost talked as if they expected Priam would have been the Primus automatically just with his leadership qualities. So he seemed to have this reputation that preceded himself. So it is still kind of puzzling as why they put him in a spot where he would get killed. Like if you're drafting the kid, other than to send a message to the rest of the group that nobody is bigger than the house, and we still don't know who actually killed Priam. They seem to be keeping that a mystery, so it'll be interesting to see if that comes out later in the book.
We have to wonder who paired who up with who, because obviously they thought that Priam was going to survive because he had kind of all the makings of it. But at the end of the day, I think they're unapologetic. It's still a school. And if you don't have what it takes, then you don't have what it takes. It doesn't matter if we thought you were going to make it super far in this whole thing. It's an example of being pampered and you can be trained, but if you've never actually fought a person before and someone's a little more ruthless than you just may not make it out at the end of the day. And I think that he becomes the example. We're not messing around here. And even the people that you thought might be safe, if you make the wrong move, you're out.
And now it opens the floor for somebody else to take that leadership position.
Yeah, all the savages can fight over it now. So they arrive in their new institute. Keep picturing a school, but it's really like a big open space that's been terraformed into various territories corresponding to the houses. The first mission is to navigate to House Mars territory and get to their castle. On the journey, there's some shenanigans going on. People are shoving each other around and stuff. And we get our first nickname, Severo the Goblin. Lovingly or not lovingly called the Goblin for a large part of this story, which I thought was pretty hilarious. As they're navigating, they spot Olympus in the sky. So there's this like floating mountain, another nod to Greek mythology here. We've got this like floating mountain that is just like this lap of luxury where the proctors are going to sit and watch the battle. Also feels very Hunger Games, but we can come back to that. House Mars realizes that their territory is a little different than everyone else's. They're seeing other territories have grains and orchards and horses, but Mars is like exposed and it's desolate and it's sitting in the middle of a valley where they feel like they're a target and they feel like they've gotten less than everyone else. Fitchner is just telling them to get over it, basically. And as he's about to leave them, 3 obsidians appear from the sky and they start laying out a banquet of food. So Cassius and Darrow, this little friendship they've started to form, they decide to make a bit of a game of it. They want to see how much food they can get before the trap springs because they know something's off about this situation. They spot the flag of House Ceres on the table, the harvest goddess, and they manage to spot the trap right in time before it springs, and there's a whole battle that kind of breaks out with House Ceres hiding in the grass. And Darrow at this point acquires a scythe. It's just kind of laying around these tables, and Fitchner is like, put that down. You look like a grain reaper. And Darrow does not put the scythe down. He claims this as part of his entire personality because it looks like a sling blade. And our Reaper is born. From here forward, he will be referred to as a Reaper by many of our characters. Once they finally found their castle, Fitchner lays down the rules. They're really wanting to know what are the boundaries here. So he tells them that ruthlessness is acceptable. If someone dies by accident, that's understandable, but murder is not allowed. And the point here really is to win. You want to show your brilliance like Alexander, Caesar, Napoleon, these conquerors. Manage an army, distribute justice, arrange for provisions, and show that you are the leader of men. Conquer. And how do they do that? They need to make one tribe out of 12, and they need to take slaves in order to do that. They're all given a standard, like a staff that is got an insignia of their house on it. Whoever has the standard owns that house. So protect your standard, protect your castle, but conquer everyone else. They wake up the next morning to find that our buddy Severo has killed 2 wolves with his bare hands. He's gutted them, he's skinned them. And it begins this whole conversation around who is the Primus. So the Primus is the leader of the house, and that person will be named by being given 5 points in one way or another. So Cassius tries to negotiate a democracy and vote in a leader. And Cassius, Darrow, and Titus, they all want to lead. They're very vocal about it. But Antonia is not going to let that happen. She negotiates her case for just waiting until the Primus is rightfully won, and she manages to win her argument. Darrow and Cassius then decide that they need to get rid of Titus if they want any chance at Primus because he is super aggressive and definitely wants to be in the lead, but he's like pretty ruthless. In the meantime, Cassius and Quinn get real cuddly. There is no fire, no food, and no hygiene going on. And while all of this is happening, basically everything is going to shit. 2 girls from House Mars are taken by Ceres as slaves. And this is really the turning point of the house that is already fragmented, really becoming desperate. One of Titus's minions, Vexus, drags a girl by her hair across the grass plain, and this denotes the first slave of House Mars, and that Titus now wields credibility. A bit of fear is set in among the others because he's now shown that he's planned for keeps. The house bands into 4 tribes. The packs are Titus and his crew. Cassius and Darrow become their own. And then we have Antonia and then Severo, the lone wolf. He just kind of does his own thing. Darrow and Cassius have gotten matches. And so therefore their crew has fire and food, but they've decided not to tell anyone about it. They want everyone else to get desperate. They want them to kind of come crawling back, but they're playing on a bit of a tightrope. There's no rules that have really been established around survival, but they're playing a pretty ruthless game by keeping this to themselves. All the while, Cassius doesn't know who killed Julian, but it seems to pop up every once in a while as he clues in that whoever it is, he's not going to let them get away with it. Darrow makes an attempt to draw some information from Vixus, only to be caught by Titus, who then catches on to the smell of smoke. Darrow has been found out, he's been holding out on them, and he's been letting them starve. This is one of many moments where Titus and Darrow start to edge in on each other in terms of this rivalry that they're building. In this moment, Darrow attacks Vixus and nearly kills him. He lives. Titus's crew chases Darrow out of the keep, but Darrow's crew is bigger and they set off to protect him. Quinn comes out of nowhere, blindsiding Cassandra as she approaches Darrow. And Quinn hits her full force in the knee with her beating stick, and basically a full on civil war begins between these crews. I remember at this point in the story thinking, like, I have no idea where this is going. And is this just going to be like the next 200 pages of like absolute savagery and them just like bumbling around? Because like no one has a plan, no one has food. They're all starved and desperate and acting like absolute maniacs. And all the while, they've got nothing. Like these other houses actually have some things. So that's kind of what was going through my mind at this stage. What was going through yours?
Yeah, I was kind of surprised at how quickly things devolved into these different tribes. I expected there might be some factions and alliances, but I didn't think it would be kind of all out warfare almost amongst the tribes. Yeah, I was surprised how quick that happened. I love the term beating stick. I mean, I just find that funny. It's not just any old stick. This is a stick meant specifically for beating.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is funny, but it's also like made so clear at this phase of the book over and over and over again that they don't have weapons and they don't have food. It's like everything they're doing, they are absolute savages. They do have a beating stick and they do have a scythe, and Severo is going around wearing a literal dead wolf's skin because it makes him feel cool, I guess. I don't know. They've devolved into like a bunch of savage children. Like it very much evokes the feeling of Lord of the Flies. Like I could not stop thinking about Lord of the Flies as I was reading this book. And it really started here because it's been a while since I read it, but I think a similar thing happens where it's kind of like utter chaos until ultimately you do have a leader that will rise up. And they aren't necessarily the best leader, but they are probably the most assertive, and people will follow. And at this point in the story, that is really what we're seeing, is that people have kind of just like fallen into these packs. They don't even really know why. And it's going to take some key events here for people to really start thinking about who they're actually following and whether they're following the right person or not.
It's interesting because the thing that Darrow is fighting against is this hierarchy. And yet, when you remove the hierarchy and everybody's equal, things
Mm-hmm.
just devolve into total chaos. And that doesn't stop until there's some sort of hierarchy that forms again. So it's just an interesting kind of look at human nature. Are we just incapable of coexisting with each other in a world that doesn't have some sort of hierarchy to it?
But well, and the name of the game here is conquering. So they're being asked to strategize and plot and plan. And if you weren't intending to conquer these lands and these people, then maybe you could live harmoniously to an extent, but those aren't the rules of the game. So they are basically being set up to go through these phases that Nero was talking about. They're in this savagery phase, and can they evolve into something that's more organized and intentional? That's what they're trying to figure out right now.
Speaking of savagery, there's seems to be something popular about this cutting ears off in this society. I noticed that of all the things you can do to torture somebody, that cutting the ear off seems to be the go-to move for that, to send a message.
I think Quinn was the first, like she took the cherry on that one, but there are a few years that get lost in this journey. But I think there's a comment about like their ears are lost and they can't do certain jobs if they don't have an ear, basically. So it's like such a savage thing to do because you're not like hurting them and they can recover. They can't grow their ear back. So you've just like completely removed opportunities in their entire lives by this moment in the institute. It is quite a choice. And there's very few things more visceral than an ear being cut off, an eye being messed with. So when you're reading it, you really feel you really feel that pain.
And in the gold society, it seems like physical beauty is just as important
Mhm.
as intelligence and all of these other components. So by mutilating somebody's face like that, you're compromising them in that way for the rest of their life.
Yeah, you're right. It's like right at the end of this section, there's a conversation between Darrow and Fitchner. And he's basically saying, like, why didn't you go to the carvers? Like, you don't really look like one of these like upper class golds. And Fitchner's kind of like, what do you mean? Like, I'm not pretty enough? And he's like, no, like, you're not as pretty as everyone else. I think that's probably holding you back, right? It's a way of bringing that to the surface, that the standards for these people are so high. Everything counts. And if you do not meet that criteria, then it's going to affect how you're ranked and what opportunities you have. So we're in the middle of this crux of a moment here between Darrow and Titus and Vixis and the crew that are following Cassius and Darrow. And Titus has been bested in this moment. Darrow got away. His crew came up and shook them off. And instead of attacking back, Titus decides to take out his revenge on House Ceres. So they raid the house, and Titus takes his first victim. There's an archer, and she becomes the first slave of House Mars. And at this point, Cassius is really paying attention. He's like, this guy is lethal, and he's a liar because he said he killed Priam, but I don't believe him. And this is the moment where Darrow witnesses Cassius starting to get suspicious of Titus, and Darrow just fans the flame. He wants him to believe that Titus killed Julian because it's the heat off of his back. He doesn't care who Titus killed, but it's really our first glimpse of that betrayal between these two that you have to assume is going to come up later. From this raid, Titus's savagery only escalates, and pretty soon there are no Ceres slaves left to take. So with nothing left to play with, Titus looks to House Mars for his entertainment. We get a bit of a time jump. We jump to 30 days later, and we find out that Titus has been mutilating the slaves. He has been taking ears, he's been beating them, and he's been sexually abusing them as well. And Cassius and Darrow aren't going to stand for it, so they develop a plan. They send Quinn to go and talk to Antonia. She's been following Titus. They think she can reason with her, try to get Antonia on their side to start to crumble Titus's little pack. But Quinn doesn't return, and Titus captures her, beats her, and takes her ear. Thinking that Quinn is actually Darrow's girl, but really she's Cassius's, he provokes Cassius, who already has a bit of an agenda against Titus. So Cassius goes after Quinn and finds himself in the throes of Titus, who beats the crap out of him, and then him and all of his minions pee all over him. So Cassius's reputation has really started to crumble. We see some fractures here from this all-star gold to a man that no one really wants to be around. Mind you, they have no showers. I think we forgot to mention that. So if someone gets peed on, it's a pretty rough deal in this game.
It's sticking with you for a bit.
Yeah, it's going to be part of your brand for a little while. Quite a phase of the book, I would say.
Yeah, I think it goes to show how pride is involved with people like Cassius that are used to being respected and put on a pedestal for their pedigree and their heritage. He was urinated on. We'll go on to see that the others, they may fear him, but they will never respect him again. So that is quite a kind of turning point in the story. And just seeing the savagery of Titus as he's taking slaves and abusing the slaves, it really gives you a loathing for Titus and makes you empathize with Cassius going after him, but at the same time, you know right away that Cassius is falling into his trap.
I felt for Cassius too, because when him and Darrow come back together after this whole thing, Cassius says, I've made a mistake. Like, I fell into this trap and I shouldn't have gone after him, and this is what happened. And if I had just restrained myself, if I had waited for you, things could have gone differently. And so I think there's a little bit of like all of that. Like, yes, everyone's pitying this guy now, which is not what you want in this game. But I think also it showed that he's reactive and he doesn't have the qualities of a leader that you really need. And in this game, I think as all of these like pieces on the board are shifting, it's like what we were just talking about. The standards are so high, you can't let any imperfections show. So Cassius has got this crazy arc where you find him really interesting and he's evolving through the story. And then this happens, and I don't know that he ever regains his ground in the same way.
Yeah, because they didn't even let him off the hook. They're not saying, oh, yeah, oh, okay, honest mistake, we get it. You were emotional. They were all kind of like, that was a dumb thing to do. You shouldn't have done that. And one character we haven't talked about much, but is pretty involved up at this point is Roke, who's actually one of my favorite characters, just the poet and is kind of the concierge of Darrow, providing wise advice on how he should handle the different situations. And it's interesting the way that Roke counsels Darrow as we get on to the subsequent chapters on how he should handle his relationship with Cassius and his treatment of Titus.
And he's a non-competitor. There's this dynamic in the book where we know the people who want to lead and really are desperate to win. And Roke has a lot of these qualities, but he doesn't really want it. He's happy to follow Darrow, believes in him, and he does want to consult with him and be one of the legionnaires around the table. Yeah, his character is a really interesting one to follow. He's one of my favorites as well because he does keep his wits about him, but he has loyalty for Darrow in a way that he really shows up a lot of the time.
I was just going to say, it kind of brings up another question. When we talked earlier about whether all of these decisions that Darrow is going to have to make is going to change him. And the other thing that makes me think of is his hatred that he had towards Golds when he started this process. As he becomes friends with guys like Roke and Cassius and the camaraderie of going to war together essentially and protecting each other, saving each other's lives, you can't help but think there's going to be bonds that are built there. And is that going to start to change his perspective on Golds because he's going to have to rely on these people? So I think that's going to be an interesting storyline to follow. And then, of course, you mentioned it earlier, this tension point of Cassius trying to figure out who killed Julian. And right now he thinks it's Titus. I feel like that's only going to ratchet up and come to a head at some point in this story.
Yeah, you know that in this game of survival, people are just looking for anything to give them an edge. Like Darrow has to play his cards so perfectly. And it is interesting thinking about characters like Roke and other characters in the story that you see them get close to each other. How close can Darrow actually get to any of these characters? Because he can't ever tell anyone who he is. So he's kind of stuck in both situations. If he makes it through this thing, is going to need people, even if he is a son of Ares, but he can never actually be who he is. So is he still alone? Is he living a life that's worth living if he can't ever actually be who he is?
And is he going to want to slaughter all these people when the son of Ares or decides to call in that request?
Yeah, because we don't know much, especially at this point in the story, of where all of these people fit in the grand scheme of the political landscape outside of the Institute. We know Cassius. We know some of them come from really powerful families, but Darrow only has so much context for who people are and how they're connected. So I think that will be interesting to see that evolve. Darrow and Cassius are out surveying the territory and they run into a girl on a horse. That girl happens to be the girl that called Darrow a pixie when he fell off the pony during training with Mateo back in our dancer Carver era. So they get in a bit of banter. Cassius and Darrow are just like, she's a pretty girl. Can we at the same time kind of flirt with her, but also maneuver a little bit and steal her horse? But she's smarter than they give her credit for. It's a trap, and as soon as she goes down, loses a little balance on her horse, 17 other horses and their riders come flooding out of the forest, and we're introduced to House Minerva. Cassius and Darrow are forced to run to the nearest pond and hide until sunfall. They're fearing for their lives. House Minerva's got men on horses waiting outside of the pond, waiting for them to make any movement until they hear a scream in the woods and then a howl, and Severo comes to their rescue covered in a wolf skin. Severo, God, I got a lot to say about Severo. He's just like the coolest underdog ever. He not only thought so far as to hide the Mars standard when he left House Mars and went looking for Cassius and Darrow because, like, where the hell did they go? But he also came up with a plan to steal Minerva's standard while they were trying to take House Mars. So, yeah, MVP. They sneak over to House Minerva. They pretend to be members of the house. Minerva buys it and they wreak absolute havoc on this castle. They steal the cook, they steal 6 horses, they burn their hay stores, and Severo runs out of there with a glittery Minervan standard in his hands like the champ that he is. I love this part. This was amazing.
Yeah, this was really the Severo coming out party. I think we knew there was more under the surface other than what we saw being the lone wolf. There was something about him even on when we first met him on the flight out to the Institute where you thought he's so brash and uncouth in terms of the way he was talking. compared to some of the other golds, that he obviously wasn't there based on his standing in society. So he had to bring some other skills to the table. And you just had a feeling that was going to show up at some point. But seeing Cassius, Darrow, and Servo in action together, that trifecta, really was fun to see. And we're seeing the combination of those skill sets and Darrow's strategic thinking combined with the craftiness of Servo and the bold brashness of Cassius, all kind of complementing each other to outsmart House Minerva there
Yeah.
and gain quite an advantage.
Yeah, I mean, like I think Severo is underestimated in basically every possible way up until this point in the story. Earlier on in the story, Severo keeps like going off, and they're like, "Where did he go? What's he doing? He's killing wolves and goats like with his bare hands. Like, what's going on?" And they kind of make this joke about like, is he just off like wanking in the woods? And at this scene, when he rescues them and they come up with this plan to take House Minerva, Severo says something about how he's got this plan and we can go and get this standard now. And Cassius is like, "Oh, Severo, like, look at you." And he's like, "What did you think? I was just off wanking in the woods." He's such a good character because he's like, I don't give a shit about these guys. He's actually like, going to work. He's just doing it by himself, waiting for the moment. And I think he wouldn't do it if it was just Cassius, but he does it because he has this like unspoken bond with Darrow. And it's moments like this that he's like, I will do this. And at the end of this section, we learn Fitchner comes to Darrow and says, like, what do you want for your prize? You got the standard. And he's like, no, no, it's Severo's. And he said, no, Severo gave it to you. So like there's just all these layers of this character that has really not been focused on in the story, but has a lot of dimensionality to him.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's going to be a pivotal character over the rest of the story, and it's cool to see him having his coming out moment, going from that lone wolf status to being part of the group and a key contributor here.
I think it's funny too. It's not really emphasized, but in the earlier scene when Titus and Darrow and Vixis have that all like that altercation and Cassius and Darrow's tribe comes, Severo is with them and they make a comment about how they start howling as they run to rescue him. And it's the beginnings of them being the howlers, but it's driven by the fact that Severo wears a wolf cloak. Like he is the first one to don this wolf cloak for House Mars and create this entity around who they are. I think it's just kind of cool. It's not ever really described that he creates this kind of tribal feeling, but it's definitely driven by him and his like willingness to be an absolute savage, but with a lot of intelligence behind him.
Yeah, and I think this section we also got introduced to another character that I think is going to be a really likable and fun character in Mustang. We met her earlier as she was sort of chirping Darrow for falling off the horse. And already I'm picking up a little bit of sexual tension between those two. And, that begs
Those
another.
three, actually, Cassius wants in on it.
True, yeah, yeah. Who knows, how things go there, but we could have a little love triangle. But it does
Cassius
kind
still
of,
smells like pee, so he's really not appealing, I think.
yeah, that's a tough look. That's a tough look. But yeah, he was charming from a distance, but maybe when he gets a little closer, that'll be a tough sell. But I do wonder, as much as Darrow was in love with EO, and EO is the inspiration of this journey, as he goes deeper and deeper in this world, is there going to be a possibility of him falling in love again? I just got a feeling those two are going to hook up at some point.
Yeah, we have to hope so, right? Like what is this world of savagery if you don't have a warm bed at night? So I guess we'll just see. But I do think there's the makings of something. Someone falls off a pony and someone calls you a pixie. Like it just feels like the beginning of a classic love story. So in the world of Red Rising, I think there's room for a little love too. Back at House Mars, the house has been taken by the Minervans. Mustang is like waiting for Darrow, Cassius, and Severo to show back up. All the while, Mustang and the Minervans have figured out how savage Titus has been, and she fully blames Darrow. In her eyes, Darrow is the leader of this pack, and we meet a new character. Pax is kind of like Mustang's sidekick, another iconic character in our story. There's a bit of a standoff between these two groups. Tony had joined the standoff howling as they ride toward the castle. Rose howling too, and this is where our howlers are born. A bunch of golds and wolf's clothing, but they're there to back Darrow. There's a battle, but nothing major happens. Darrow bests Pax by hitting him in the groin. Mustang manages to escape, and she holds House Mars, but there's no standard to be found because we know that Severo was smart enough to hide the standard. So Antonia, Darrow, and Roke approach. Mustang is at the gates. She's trying to barter to bring the slaves back to Minerva, the slaves that Titus has taken from House Ceres, and she's denied. She has no standard. She's outnumbered. So she then tries to barter for Titus. She wants justice, and she's again denied. Darrow is our stand-in Primus, and he is showing his dominance in this moment. He is not wavering one bit, and he tells her, look around. There are no golds here. I'm a red, you're a red. We're all reds until one of us gets enough power, and then we get rights, and then we make our own law. And she tells him, you should hope that's not true, because there's a boy here just like you. And my proctor calls him the Jackal. And this is our first whisper of the next evolution of this story. This is our introduction to Mustang, as you said, our introduction to the Howlers, and a bit of a power shift as we see Darrow really claim his house. He's simultaneously pushing off Minerva, but he's like backing Titus. He's not saying he did the right things, but he's saying this is a game. And if you don't have the power, you don't make the laws. So this was quite an interesting evolution. Mustang is, again, one of my top favorite characters.
Yeah, she's great. She seems a little more compassionate and sensitive compared to like the rest of the people in this world, and looking to maybe bring that out in other people. And I think Darrow is closer to her from that perspective than he's leading on, but he's well aware that he's being watched, and everything he says and does in this moment is going to decide whether he positions himself as the leader in the group. So he has to say the right things, do the right things, even if it goes against his natural instincts. But yes, that ominous introduction of the Jackal character is very intriguing. Interested to meet him for the first time.
It's interesting. Like, we're getting all these nicknames, which I find kind of funny. It again is very Lord of the Flies. You're in this like savage survival scenario, and you just rid yourself of your old identity, and you become this new character, whether it's the Goblin or the Reaper or the Jackal. And I think this is a really interesting point in the story because, like we were talking about a minute ago, about how things kind of devolve really quickly, but it's so focused on House Mars. And you're thinking, get it together, guys. Like, there's a game to be played here. Like, you guys are worried about chopping people's ears off and fighting amongst yourselves, but there's a real game to play. What are you going to do about it? So once you hear the whisper of the Jackal, well, now it feels like we have someone to compete with. We really need to watch ourselves here because the Jackal might show up and we don't know what he's capable of. I also like that in this moment, we're getting a different dynamic where we have characters like Antonia, who is very unlikable, but she wants to be a leader. There's no point in the story so far where you feel like she's going to be a leader. She just doesn't have it. But Mustang shows up and she has a very different approach. And you can see how she could go toe to toe with Darrow. She's got all the makings of someone who could be charming, who could be strategic. She's got a following already. So I think that both of those characters appearing at this point in the story really shifts the dynamic. And House Mars really has to think about what are they going to do, because if they're not careful, they're about to be a bunch of slaves.
And shout out to Pax for just like a cool character that came and went fairly quickly. And I don't know if we've seen the last of him, but I just love the kind of giant Pax coming into the fold, screaming his name as he's charging at Darrow, body checking Darrow's horse over. And then almost crushing his spine with a bear hug before, with a few strategic kicks in the balls, Darrow narrowly escapes that bear hug. But to me, those are just the little moments of joy, I guess, like when you meet a character like that is just kind of fascinating. And I have a hunch that we'll see an alliance between House Minerva and House Mars at some point, and Pax could be playing a key role in fending off the Jackal. It has this sort of feeling or trajectory as if the houses could eventually all create alliances to boil down to two different sides. And you can see the Jackal heading up one side and Darrow heading up the other. And then their combination of all their super strong and devious and cunning and poetic different team members that they have going against each other. It's
Mhm.
it's interesting to see, and it's crazy to think this is just part of the overall plan. There's all the same sort of training going on
Mhm.
all the different planets. So who knows what crazy people and mutants are out there.
Yeah, so many things could happen, right? We don't know. After the standoff between Darrow and the Mustang, they go back into the castle. Titus's tribe is sitting in silence. Everything has really broken down here. The girls won't speak to the boys because of what they've seen them do to these slaves. And House Mars is really falling apart. Darrow sees the opportunity to fix it. Titus has been kept in the cellars away from anyone else, so he can't cause any more damage. Darrow then leans on Rock a bit, discussing what should they do with Titus. Darrow's feeling this guilt and sense of commitment to Cassius because Cassius made a claim on Titus after what he did to Quinn and after what he did to him. And also quietly, we know that Cassius believes that Titus killed Julian. After this whole thing, Cassius is being seen as weak. So Darrow's feeling for him. He kind of wants to throw him a bone here, but Roke is really against this. He does not see Cassius being involved in Titus's punishment as the right thing by any means. Darrow decides to visit Titus in the cellar. He wants to see him for himself, and he kind of lectures him on the game, how he's played it like a fool, he's played it with violence, how he's been killing people with no need when this is about a civilization. It's about true power. It's about finding a way to make people want to follow you. And Darrow asks him, why did he do it? Why did he rape those girls? And he says to himself, they did it first. I killed the bloody damn monsters. Now their daughters bloody well get what she got. And like a punch to the face, there's a word that stands out here. The bloody damn monsters, the word that Darrow's been told over and over again not to let slip. And we realize that Titus is a red. Dancer has lied to Darrow unless he didn't know there were other reds that had been carved into golds. And if Titus hadn't let that one word slip, things might have been different. But with this, Darrow knows that Titus is a dog and he needs to be put down. So he brings him down to the square in front of all the house members to give him his sentence. Now, Darrow attempts to be just. When Titus challenges the sentence he gives, he accepts the challenge. A duel is customary, so they will honor that. And Cassius comes forward immediately. He wants to make his claim, and even though Rock and Quinn have tried to dissuade him, Darrow's guilt and his promise wins over, and he lets Cassius in the ring, and Cassius kills Titus. I think Darrow expected at this point that this would have quelled Cassius's like rage, and immediately Darrow knows that he did the wrong thing, and he feels guilty. He feels like it was his responsibility to take Titus down, and he's given that to Cassius, and he's made himself look weak, and he's not allowed his brother, Titus, to be taken out the way that he believed he should have been as a red. He's very emotional about the whole thing. He goes out for a walk on his night shift and gets a visit from Fitchner. They have a whole conversation about the dynamics of the game, and it becomes pretty clear to Darrow that the proctors that are watching are going to allow certain things and not intervene otherwise. Fitchner lets it slip that he knows. He knows Darrow killed Julian. He was a part of the whole passage. So we're left to wonder if that's going to catch up to him. It seems like a very intentional move that Fitchner puts it out there that Titus's death does not absolve Darrow of him killing Julian. But we also know that Cassius believes that he's taken him out. And before Fitchner leaves, Darrow manages to ask him who the Jackal is, and Fitchner responds that he is the Arch-Governor's son, and he will make Titus look like a blubbering child. And that is the end of part 1 of this series. It felt like the perfect way to close it off by, Titus, unfortunately or fortunately, is now done, but we get this reveal that the Jackal is not just a savage maniac. The Jackal is the son of the man in power.
Yeah, what a great finish to this section. I mean, I can't think of too many times I've been more shocked by a left turn in a book than finding out Titus was a red. So I think when you said punch to the face of Darrow and to the reader. That's a pretty good way of putting it. But I loved it. I mean, just
Yes.
that little twist in the story, as unexpected as it was, it made a lot of sense. And then we find out that although Darrow knows he has to put Titus down, there is actually some guilt because now he has a bit of a camaraderie or a common feeling as both being Reds. And I think he has a little more empathy for Titus in terms of all the rage that Titus had and the cruelty he had, where maybe that was coming from. But ultimately, he does decide he has to put him down for the greater good of the cause because Titus can't really be trusted, and then allows Cassius to convince him to do the deed. And it reminds me of the wise words of Ned Stark from the start of Game of Thrones, where he tells Bran that the one who casts the sentence should be the one who swings the
Mm-hmm.
sword. Good leadership qualities by Ned there that unfortunately Darrow learned the hard way. He should have been the one to carry that out, and now he lost that opportunity to solidify the respect from a leadership perspective. And you still have Cassius walking around with this rage and his wounded pride. He just cannot let it go. You kind of worry he could turn into be just as much of a problem as Titus is if that goes unchecked.
Yeah, I think in this scene, that's the realization that Darrow has, not specifically about being worried about Cassius, but he realizes that while he thought he was being a good friend, in his mind, he's like, well, Cassius laid claim and I'm kind of moving up the ranks. I can do this for him as his friend and it's nothing to me. But he realizes that he's rewarding a mindset and a sense of entitlement. And he's like, what am I going to do with the next guy that has a vendetta against someone and wants to kill whoever they want? What do I do with them now? Because I've set a precedence with Cassius. And in a way, you're also like showing favoritism. Like if you're a leader, then you have to be making the best decision for your tribe, regardless. You can't just be making this decision because your friend called dibs on someone and like really boiling it down. But we see him learn in this scene that, Rock tried to guide him in the right direction and tell him, like, this is how this is going to be received. It's not going to go well for you or for Cassius, but he doesn't listen, and now he's kind of jeopardized the position that he's in.
Well, at least he's feared again, but that's about all that came out of it. His advice originally was the right advice to take, but Darrow didn't take it. Probably a lesson he'll learn and a little bit of a weakness in his leadership qualities, something he'll probably take with him. And yeah, you got to remember, I think he's 16 or 17 years old being thrust into these situations and trying to navigate these like crazy circumstances. So that could come back to bite him in the ass a little bit.
Yeah, and I think, to give him a little credit, I don't know that anyone standing in that square is thinking this is the wrong thing to do. I think they all realize they're all probably living in fear of him, right? So it's definitely the right thing to do. He's lucky in that regard because if it had been anyone else, Arrow would have had to deal with doing the thing that he needed to do as the leader and it being a divisive decision if there weren't enough people who bought into that decision in the first place, where Titus was kind of like an easy, someone just has to say these words that like, we need to eliminate you. But I think the thing about the Brotherhood was very interesting. I kept feeling in this book, it's like you feel like you've got a grasp and then another layer unravels, like another layer. And then you're like, oh my God, there's Reds and how many are there? And like, this moment of like he's trying to deal with Titus, who's this like horrendous character, and then you feel this empathy that he's got this brotherhood like feeling for the guy. It's like the last day, and all of a sudden you feel empathy for this dark and horrible character because you actually know, like you said, he's watched all the things happen that he's done to other people in this game in his own life. And so he's not just like an entitled, power hungry gold. He's really like a Red who is doing the things that they worried that Darrow would do, but Darrow is not doing. So he's like a good counterpoint for Darrow, I think. And then we see him eliminated, and it does kind of wipe the slate clean a little bit of like, where will things go? Now, we have to talk about this fact that Titus is a Red, because this is huge in terms of the storyline. We never thought it possible. We were basically told that the carving was something that many could not survive, that many before Darrow didn't survive. So it begs a lot of questions here of, A, does Dancer know there are other Reds? How many Reds are there? And what does it actually mean that Darrow wasn't the only Red in this game?
Yes, yes, very compelling questions. It makes you wonder, is there more dancers out there? Like, as Ares got multiple dancers recruiting in the same way, and how does that change your approach if you're Darrow? It almost made me wonder whether Titus figured out that Darrow was a red as well,
Right.
just by his reaction. We never really find that.
It doesn't seem out of the question in that scene because he calls him like a brother. Like he's like, I thought you would understand, but it
Hmm.
doesn't come out and say it. And then when he drops the bloody damn, you don't know if he did it on purpose or not.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I was wondering too. So, yeah, it was a great scene, one I'll remember for forever in terms of scenes that stick with you over the years from these books. So, and then just, yeah, wrapping up with that conversation with Finchner. I have a hard time putting my finger on what type of guy this guy is. I can't tell if he's just like playing the sensei role of like guiding Darrow in the right direction, but using sort of unorthodox method to get there,
Hmm.
or if he's got some other agenda and he's trying to use Darrow just as a pawn. It's hard to tell whether he's there to help or hinder. I'm kind of leaning towards that he will be a likable good guy or an ally to Darrow eventually, but it's a little ambiguous.
I think those are all really great questions. And I think it also opens up the question of like, what's in it for the Proctors? Like, they have all these houses. We've been very focused on these candidates and as they move through the Institute, but there's always another side, especially in this political game that they're playing. And so it does raise some good thoughts and questions around these people who are guiding these young people. So I think we shall see. I mean, this red thing, I think as soon as this happened, I couldn't stop thinking about it and thinking about like, what did it mean? I have to believe myself that Dancer didn't know. Kind of am like in your school of thought of like, Darrow is like their one, but what does it mean then if someone else created a gold out of a red? And how would that have happened? And what would be the purpose of it? Who knew about it? There's just a lot of questions. So it did make for a very interesting part of the story. And at this point, we are over 50%. So this was definitely like the largest chunk. And we're going to see how things evolve in the last half of the book here. So that is it for this episode. Next episode, we're going to be covering the last half. So that's from chapter 30, House Diana, until the very end. And if you want to join us as we read epic series like Red Rising, you can find my Fable Book Club link in the show notes. And don't forget to follow so you don't miss an episode. But until then, thanks for hanging with us, you crazy hell divers, and we will catch you next time.